My friends, some people when they retire have to stop doing what they do. Some people learn new things to do. And some people around here get to show you what they do. Like Dan Fisher will show us, he's composed something and we'll play it in church. Well, I get adult education to show you what I'm doing since retirement. And we're going to start with a song today, but I need help from the tech crew. Can you put the song up for us? This is what I'm doing lately. This one's new. I just wrote this one last week and did the video this morning. Start it up. And we're going to sing together. I'm going to turn off my microphone so we can hear each other instead of me. I should have double checked it before I brought it to you. All right, so now we're on to the other show. There we are. Last May 15th, a mass shooting occurred at the Geneva Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, California. The church was a location of a Taiwanese congregation that borrowed the facilities in the afternoon. In the shooting, one person died, and 5 were wounded. The shooter was a 68-year-old man named David Cho, who resided in Las Vegas. He was arrested at the scene. He's alleged to have committed the crime out of a political hatred of the Taiwanese people. David Cho himself was Taiwan-born, but did not regard himself as Taiwanese. Because this happened in a congregation affiliated with the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan, which Shar and I served for 39 years, it's considered as worthy by us, if by nobody else, of a morning at Hope Church adult education. Some of what it means to be Taiwanese goes back to events that happened in 1895, in which the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan had a small role. See, China had just lost a war with Japan, after which the Chinese Empire ceded Taiwan in perpetuity to the Japanese Empire. But neither emperor asked the people of Taiwan what they thought about it. When the Japanese army arrived, they had to fight their way from the north to the south. And when they drew near Tainan, the city in the south, where the capital was, the leading citizens of town, that is the Chamber of Commerce, asked the Reverend Thomas Barclay, an Englishman who was expendable if they killed him anyway, to go out and meet the Japanese army in their camp and say, nobody will oppose you coming in, we'll open the gates, bring your army in. I had the privilege of portraying Reverend Barclay in 2018 and got my picture in the paper for it. In 1911 then, 15, 16 years later, there was a revolution in China. The victorious party was the Nationalist Party. They tossed out the emperor and the whole imperial thing and took over. Sun Yat-sen, the father of the nation, was a Christian. This theme you'll hear come up later too. In the 1920s, Dr. Sun died and Chiang Kai-shek took over as the head of some warlords coalition, and finally he unified the nation. As part of their unifying the nation, the nationalists declared a new national flag in which they put their party symbol up in the corner, the white sun. One wonders what the MAGAs will do to the stars and stripes. Between 1938 and 1945, China and Japan had another war. And this time, China was on the side of the victors. And so the Chinese took the surrender on the deck of the USS Missouri in the port there in Tokyo. It took a couple of months during which the Japanese colonial government in Taiwan was considered a caretaker government. Just, give out the traffic tickets, keep things in order until we get enough of our army and a governor over there to take over. That happened on October 25th of 1945. The group who came from China very soon established a martial law dictatorship that lasted for over 40 years. As part of the changeover of power, 600,000 Japanese colonialists were sent packing back to Japan. But they were more than replaced over the next 5 years by 2 million people from China who came with Chiang Kai-shek and his army and his government. During the years of the Second World War, though the nationalists headed by Jiang and the communists headed by Mao were in alliance to fight the Japanese, as soon as the Japanese were out of the way, they went back to it hammer and tongs. And the Civil War was lost by the nationalists. In 1949, on October 1st, Mao Zedong stood up in Beijing, said, "The people of China have stood up," and declared the beginning of the People's Republic of China. But Taiwan at that time was under control of the nationalists. Taiwan has never, ever been under the control of the People's Republic of China, no matter what they say. In the transfer, Jiang, his government, his army, and all of the gold from the national treasury made its way to Taiwan. The Reformed Church in America had been operating out of Xiamen or Amoy here. And the missionaries were booted out, 1950-51. They dispersed to the Philippines, where there were a lot of people from Amoy there doing a Chinese thing. They went to Indonesia, where there were people who spoke Dutch. They went to, where else do I have on there? Hong Kong, where a lot of people who left Xiamen went to resettle because they had money. And in 1953, it began Reformed Church missionaries began a presence in Taiwan, working as part of the local Presbyterian Church in Taiwan. Taiwan's Presbyterian Church was originally established by English missionaries in the south and Canadian missionaries in the north, and there were two churches. But during the war, when the missionaries were gone, the Taiwanese got together, liked each other, and after the war, before the missionaries got back, they said, "We're one church now," and they unified it. The members were ethnic Han people. That is, they were the people who had emigrated to Taiwan since about 1620 from Xiamen and around there in China, speaking the same language in Amoy as they do in Taiwan. By 1950, though, by 1950, the influx of the 2 million people from China, principally from North China, really skewed the ethnic distribution. There were 15% of the people were from China, 85% or so, 82% from Taiwan, and the Aboriginal people 3%. The Aboriginal population has remained pretty steady between 2 and 3% of Taiwan's population. As the years went by, a lot of those mainlanders who came were old already. They were not reproducing. Some of them came over as soldiers and were single and remained so for the rest of their lives. There wasn't a lot of increase in that population. In fact, that diminished. And so by 1980, the mainlanders were down to about 12%. 2020, they're about 10% of the population. But that really doesn't matter anymore, and that's part of our story. If green means identifying as Taiwanese, and blue means identifying with China, and the pink means Aboriginal, that's kind of how it went. Now, I've done some lying with statistics here by making the arrows bigger and smaller without any sense of proportion. So don't take these to indicate anything except up and down. a certain proportion of the mainlanders who came from China were only going to be there temporarily. Some of them just said, as soon as I can get a visa to go to Paraguay or Brazil or any place else, I'm out of here. A lot of others stayed because they listened to the promise made by their leader, Chiang Kai-shek, that we're going back any day now. The preparations, the military plans are being made, and they stayed. Part of what happened was when they came into Taiwan, they took the place of the Japanese colonialists. There had been, as in many colonies, a glass ceiling. Local people can only go so high above the glass ceiling. It's people from the colonial homeland. Well, that happened again when Chiang and his bunch came. They took all of the top positions in the government, corporations, and everything, and they put a firm glass ceiling up there. From the 1960s to the 1980s, a lot of Taiwanese left to get education. And a certain large number of them went to this little town in the middle of Ohio where there's some college. I think the town is Columbus or something. Anyway, a lot went there. For certain parts of those decades, the largest number of international students arriving in America were from Taiwan. Opportunity knocked. Taiwanese who had settled here, who were Christians, said, here's a group of people who are lonely, they're out of place, they're feeling uneasy, they want to be with people who speak their language, and so they started a lot of Taiwanese churches. This is Newtown Reformed Church in Queens, New York, 1713 Dutch language. It got American within about 100 years, and in 1970 it got Taiwanese, and now it's back to being English, but it's all full of Asian faces. So they've gone through, that was one of them. A lot of these churches were started all over America, especially in the places where Taiwanese congregated. Rochester, New York, around the whole tech industry up there. Boston, Silicon Valley, California, Atlanta, New York, New Jersey, Los Angeles. A lot of Taiwanese churches started. They met the needs of the people. The attraction, part of the attraction of people to be part of a church associated with the Presbyterian Church of Taiwan, people from Taiwan who weren't Christians. They would be attracted by, this is language. We'll have a meal after church, it'll be our food. You know, these are my people. But part of it was also in Taiwan, the Taiwan Presbyterian Church had begun speaking up. When Nixon went to China, anybody old enough for that? When Nixon went to China, 1971, the Taiwan Presbyterian Church made a declaration to the government of Taiwan. And it urged that, seeing things changing internationally for Taiwan, China kinds of things, they said, let's work to let everybody who lives in this land vote in an election about our future. This was not allowed. 4 years later, they made another statement. The government sort of doubled down and said, you're going to be China. Nothing is allowed to be published here that's not published in Chinese character. Well, the Presbyterians and the Roman Catholics have been working for several years to come out with a new translation of the New Testament. It was published in Romanized Taiwanese. The Ministry of Education said, absolutely not. Any of those that have not been sold, we're taking them. And they seized them. The church found this as an occasion to make a statement. Eventually, the government backed down. 10,000 copies have been printed. They returned them. Okay, you can distribute them, but you may not print anymore. So all of the work to come up with a new translation of the New Testament for all of the people, well, most of the people of this land, went into the dustbin of history. It was not republished until after the year 2000, but the moment had passed. And so it was republished, but I doubt that there are more than, including the original 10,000, more than 20,000 copies of it out there. I used to have one, but I didn't find it useful because nobody used that translation. In 1975, Chiang Kai-shek died. He had married the daughter of the richest man in China back in the 20s, and part of the expense of that was putting away all of his other wives and being baptized as a Christian in the Methodist Church. And so he did. he died, and there was this big Christian funeral for him. His son, not by the wife that he was married to then, but by a different earlier wife, because the Republic of China said, we are governed by law, we are democratic, his son had to cool his heels for 3 years as prime minister until he could become president, because after all, that's how it works in a democracy. Across the Taiwan Straits in 1976, Mao Zedong died, and there was some chaos, not chaos in the government, but political back and forth, the Gang of Four and such, and eventually Deng Xiaoping came to power there. Time passed. In 1977, President Carter in the US made human rights one of the linchpins of his foreign policy. And so the church saw another opportunity. They declared to the government a statement on human rights, and it ended with the phrase, to make Taiwan to be a new and independent country. That was blasphemy. The government just said, okay. They started making lists of names, and they bided their time. In 1979, there was something called the Kaohsiung Incident. Kaohsiung is where Shar and I, both of our children were born. We lived there for 25 years, but we were not there then. There was a human rights rally, which the military police and the city police turned into a riot, after which a bunch of people had their heads busted up and a few soldiers had scratches, you know. But somebody said to me, it looked like they just put a Band-Aid on a guy and took a picture of him. The opposition rally was the occasion by which the government then took out the lists, and they started arresting people, including 10 prominent members of the Taiwan Presbyterian Church, 3 of whom Shar and I were privileged to get to know, the general secretary and some local clergy. One of the local clergy was arrested in the pulpit of his church while preaching on a Sunday afternoon. The police marched in and took him. The churchy fallout in the US and Canada was this. There's a group of Taiwanese churches called the Formosan Evangelical Church. They don't even use the name Taiwan, they use Formosa, a Portuguese name for the place. They are Taiwanese in language, but non-political, because they had so many contacts back in Taiwan and they wanted to go back themselves, and for these, they didn't want to stir up any problem by being political. Another group of churches associated with the Presbyterian Church USA, the Reformed Church in America, the United Church of Christ, they had no problem talking politics after the benediction. If you'd go to their church, you would hear a Bible sermon. It would be pretty typical what you'd hear in any church. And then once the benediction was over, let's all go have coffee, tea, or a meal, and the politics would come out. They had no problem with it. Third group were the originally Chinese language, Mandarin language churches, which were strongly supportive of Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalist Party in this kind of thing. And what did I say at the bottom? In the 21st century, there's been a mission creep. Some of those congregations that were started as Taiwanese, well, their children were learning English and learning Mandarin, and so they eventually went from a Taiwanese congregation to a Mandarin congregation to an English congregation, and the group of old folks in the Taiwanese service shrank as old folks died off. That's the kind of church you found in Irvine, California, where we started this whole thing. Whoops. 1987, nothing lasts always. Martial law, which started about 1947, ended in 1987. Under martial law, high school students, boys and girls, learned how to march and played with dummy guns and learned how to do that kind of stuff. There was a military and political security officer and staff on every high school campus and definitely in universities. They were mixed up with the Nationalist Party organization on campus, the Young Democrats, Young Republicans, Young Nationalists. These offices were kind of together, the Nationalist Party youth. In 1987, martial law ended, but those officers stayed on campus. They no longer had much to do with students unless somebody started talking about communism, but they watched the faculty, They watched the administration. They watched the janitors. They kept tabs on everybody's security. It wasn't until the 21st century that these guys were finally retired off and stopped being on campus. Jiang Jingwo, the son of Chiang Kai-shek, who had taken over as president in 1978, eventually died in 1988. Now, Sun Yat-sen, the father of the nation, was a Christian. Chiang Kai-shek was a Christian. And when Jiang Jingwo died, there's his hearse. It's got a great big cross on the front, underneath the Nationalist Party symbol, which is prominent up higher. My missionary friends and I were there going, what? We never knew he had anything to do with anything Christian. But because they needed a good ceremony funeral and the Baptists did it really well, he had a Baptist nationalist funeral. And his vice president, who was Taiwanese and a member of the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan, became president. Sensing their grip on power failing, the bunch above the glass ceiling got upset. And they began a new party. They started the New Party. The New Party was made of old mainlanders, old military officers who were retired, old soldiers, taxi drivers, and thugs. And they started the New Party. They lost their entitlement. They organized a new party, and they were going to make sure that power was left in the hands of the people to whom it rightfully belonged. And they put up a presidential candidate in 1996 presidential elections. But in 1996, the vice president, the Presbyterian, graduate of Cornell, was reelected. Now, he was from the Nationalist Party, but things really began to change. What we call deep blue in Taiwan, which is hardcore nationalists, became kind of lighter and lighter blue, and it was becoming a Taiwanese party, which made those people in the New Party even angrier. Let's see. Where am I? Yeah. During the free election, the first free election of a national leader among ethnic Chinese people in the history of the world, 1996 in Taiwan, the neighbors 100 miles away did the same kind of thing they did last August. They had live fire military drills with the Navy. They shot missiles to land near to Taiwan, and they put everyone exactly where they said they were going to put it, trying to say to people, we know where you live. Look what we could do to you. But the election went off. President Lee, who came to be known as Mr. Democracy, began to change things. In 2000, what was unthinkable in Taiwan happened. A pro-Taiwan party won the presidential election. They didn't change the flag, though. They didn't. This is their party's flag. This is not the national flag. They won the presidency, but not the legislature. So you had one of these deals where the Congress is in the hands of one party and the executive in another. I think that's a Michigan experience, isn't it? And you couldn't really do anything. And so for 8 years, because they got reelected 4 years later, and for 8 years, not much happened, after which these guys were back because they said, look, they can't run the country. Well, who stopped them? Well, we did, see? And they held the presidency from 2008 to 2016. They also held a majority in the parliament those years. And the president was a Roman Catholic. Somehow in Taiwan, people are getting used to the idea that if they're from the Nationalist Party, they're going to be Christians. And if they're from the pro-Taiwan party, if they're pro-Taiwan, they might be Christians, but not necessarily. So 2008 to 2016, back to the nationalists. In 2009, we had this guy. He was born above the glass ceiling. And he went to work in the government as above the glass ceiling people of his age did. He was in the information section of Taiwan's diplomatic office in Toronto. And he wrote a screed and published it, and he didn't disguise it enough that people couldn't find out who did it. Very anti-Taiwanese, very racist. He said that anybody who was not a pure mainlander, like him and his relatives, was a bunch of bastards and they were unfit to rule any nation. This did not go over well with the people in Taiwan. He was vilified, and where Shar and I were living in the city of Tainan, across the street on an electrical box or something, there was a wanted dead or alive poster with his picture on it. People did not, I mean, he wasn't wanted dead or alive, but that was the feeling in Taiwan about this guy. In 2014, in an attempt to use a slippery committee maneuver in the Nationalist Party-controlled parliament to move Taiwan into greater proximity to China by letting more Chinese people come in and open things like dry cleaner shops and tea shops. I mean, just opening the whole economy to China. The university, a bunch of university students went into the parliament while they were in recess and took over the chamber. They piled up desks and stuff against the door. There was one door to get in and out for them, but the legislators couldn't come in. The police came, and the police said, well, we don't want any fights here, so we'll just stand here and watch. And that's what happened. The police watched. And as soon as the news got out, the people surrounded everybody. And it was people who were in favor of the students inside said, we're watching whatever happens here. The students were inside for over 30 days. But, you know, they could come and go from the back door. They had certain restrictions on who could come in and how many could come in, you know, but it was a good interchange, and the nation was just transfixed. I was at the Theological College down in South Taiwan, and classes were canceled, so students could go up in shifts and support the movement. Two stories I want to tell from that. One is there was a retired professor of nuclear physics. He had been here in America. When he retired, his wife died. His children, who were adults by then, stayed. He moved back to Taiwan to live out his last days there. He went up to Taipei. In this picture, you see a building back here with red. That's a church. That's Jinan Presbyterian Church. The building has been there since before the war. And Jinan Church, next to the legislature, all of their land around the church building was where the portable toilets were put, the portable showers were put, the trash dumpsters were put. My friend, this retired professor, went up to Taipei, and he went to that church where he cleaned toilets, he emptied trash cans, he cleaned showers, he did whatever he could for hospitality for these people who were standing up for his country. Quite in contrast, there was a gangster on the side of the nationalists, and while the pro-Taiwan party was in power, he ran away to China to avoid being arrested. But after the nationalists came back, he came back. He got together his thugs, and during this demonstration, he marched his thugs down the street just to show people their power. It was kind of like, you know, marching to the Capitol, just to show people your power. And at one point, he got out a loudspeaker and he shouted at the young people who were there, "You're not fit to be considered Chinese." And they responded, "That's okay, we're Taiwanese." Those are my two stories from that. Which brings us back to the guy in California. Let's see if I can find that. Oh, that's my next page, excuse me. If I don't see the page, I don't know what I was going to say. I'm kind of like an actor up here. David Cho, the guy in orange, that's his arrest photo, was born in Taiwan in 1953, and as I said earlier, above the glass ceiling. He was entitled to a leadership role someplace in society. He became an academic. He did everything right. He studied hard. He got a good degree. He went abroad. He got a doctorate in a technical field, and he came back to Taiwan sometime in his late 30s, thinking, all I have to do is show up, show them my ID, which says, though I was born in Taiwan, my parents were from such and such a province in China, and I'll be in. Tenure granted. Things had changed in Taiwan during the years he was away. Taiwan universities looked for things that you look for when you're going to hire a professor. You know, does this person have a good degree? Can this person teach? Was this person a good member of the faculty, cooperative and such? And they didn't hire him. The best he got, instead of being at an impressive national university, he got a couple of adjunct jobs at little private universities, where, because he had his nose firmly out of joint, he wasn't welcomed back. And soon he was a frustrated man, so he went back to America, and by the time of last May, he was a security guard someplace in Las Vegas, and he had a couple guns. Because after all, when you're in America, you gotta have them, right? So one day, last May, he went to church. He picked the church randomly because it had Taiwanese in its name. He didn't have any vendetta against churches or Christians. It was against Taiwanese. And he knew he'd find them there. He went to church that morning. He socialized with people now and then, and every once in a while he would disappear for a few minutes as if to go to the men's room. But while he was disappeared, he was chaining doors shut. And he was putting glue in locks. And he even put super glue all the way around one door. He was going to keep those people in there. And then when everything was ready on that side, he came back into the room where the people were gathered, and he took out his guns and started shooting. There was a fellow there in the church that morning who was not a Christian. He was a medical doctor, which has nothing to do with being a Christian or not. He just happened to be a medical doctor. He had brought his mother because she was a member of the church, and it was her old home, old town people, speaking Taiwanese, eating Taiwanese food, being with people. So he had brought her there. When he heard the shots, he responded as a doctor. He went to save people. And he tackled the guy, and for his pains, he was shot dead. But that delayed enough time so that some other guys in the church, all over 70 years old, except for the young pastor whom you see here, they tackled the guy, they tied him up with extension cords, and they called the police. Back in Taiwan, you see the self-identification of people. This is linear across the years, and I can't read the numbers, they're too small for me. But the black line says, I don't answer this question. There used to be more people who would not answer the question, are you Taiwanese or Chinese? But that's basically fallen. Everybody has an opinion now. The blue line is, I am Chinese. The red line is the people who say, well, we're kind of both, you know, we're in the middle. And the green line is, we are Taiwanese, which now is above 80%. David Cho in California was the last gasp of the blue line that has fallen to the very bottom. So, Taiwanese churches, because of positions they took in Taiwan, became attractive places in North America for Taiwanese expatriates who found hometown, who found love, who found support, and who heard the gospel. And so those churches grew. Now that immigration is from China more than from Taiwan, the Taiwanese churches have either gone the way of Taiwanese to English or Taiwanese to mixed Taiwanese and Mandarin to mixed Mandarin and English to just a little bit of Taiwanese on the side. But they still are doing the same kind of good evangelistic, hometown, good feeling stuff now with people from China. Some Taiwanese churches are English language churches. Some use English and Mandarin, yeah. And some maintain very strongly their identity as Taiwanese, which is why this church and its members were targeted by this guy. The man who lost his own life was a medical doctor, good man. He had no problem being in church, even though he was not a church person. But he was ministered to as well. And in the end, he gave his life in ministry to save his people, including Christians. Thank you very much. Oh, I got done too early. There's too much time for questions, I'm afraid. But we'll see what you come up with.
I'm Judy Vanderwilt. I just have a comment. Interestingly, the son of the man who saved all these people in the church was a student in the Catholic Church in Rancho Santa Margarita, where my son teaches. And he was my son's student. Okay. And all this happened at the time of graduation. Yeah. And the son still had to take his exams after this horrible event where his father was killed. And but anyway, of course, he graduated. Jeff says he was just a wonderful young man.
So Dave Myers, and I've really enjoyed this. I have all kinds of questions.
Then please.
I'm sure we all do. Two questions. One, the distinction between Taiwanese and Chinese in Taiwan, is that visible to you? And linguistically, could you explain to me the difference?
Okay. Here's my easiest way of explaining the difference. On the other side of the Atlantic, there's this place called Europe, right? And everybody there speaks European, right? What's European? What is it? I mean, it's just one language, isn't it? Europe, it's just one language, right? Now, China's the same way. China has all these languages every place. What we call Taiwanese has its roots in the part of Fujian in China where Xiamen, Amoy is, but it's that language from that place, modified through history. Mandarin is basically a northern Chinese language. So it's like saying everybody in Europe speaks real European. It's called Fries or Flemish, right? Well, no. Real European is Hochdeutsch, yeah? Or Espanol, Francais. What is real European? What is real Chinese? A political decision made in China long, long ago said the language of where our emperor comes from is the official language. That's what's known as Mandarin today. And it's as different from Taiwanese as Portuguese is from German. But they're all Europe, right? They're all Chinese. So yes, it's very easy to tell the difference. Hana?
With an exception.
With the exception.
The exception is that they all use the same written language.
Yes, they all use the same written language, so everybody can read everybody else's stuff. There are some differences of syntax and sometimes vocabulary, but the meaning is out there. So I would put things out for students in terribly done Chinese, which was kind of Mandarin characters and Taiwanese syntax and like that, but they could all understand what I was trying to get at. So yes, I can hear the difference. So the name of the nation, the Republic of China, in Mandarin, 中华民国, that's how my daughter learned to say it. I say 中华民国. Same four characters. Okay. Or this is the one I really like. In Taiwanese, the same character can be pronounced several different ways. So I'm going to give you a sentence in which the same character is pronounced 4 different ways. And then I'm going to give it to you in Mandarin, where it's pronounced the same way, the same character. In Taiwanese, Ahyangong, Hyonggang, and Hu Jinpang. Okay? In Mandarin, xiang shuo xiang gang de xiang han xiang. And it's the same characters, the same thing, but in Taiwanese, every time you come to this one character, which is, my friend Stinky says Hong Kong's incense is very fragrant. Stinky says Hong Kong's incense is fragrant in two different languages. And in Cantonese, it's the same pattern as Mandarin. It's pronounced the same way every time, but in Taiwanese, you pronounce it differently, even though it's written the same.
So if I'm hearing you right, the people in Taiwan who would still identify as Chinese would mostly be Mandarin speaking.
Yes, but they came in above the glass ceiling.
Right.
And they said all education is going to be in our language.
This is really a stupid question, but can you visibly see, is there an ethnic difference visibly if you see somebody walking down the street?
In the 21st century, among young people, not particularly. But as recently as 1990, you could walk down the street and pick out the mainlanders among the old people.
Okay.
They're taller, they're different shaped faces, but those were mainlanders from North China. If somebody was from Fujian in South China, they were our homies, you know, even though their political loyalty might be something else. Yeah.
So one other question, then I'll give
Yeah.
up the mic. During the Sunflower Movement,
Right.
that was a pro-Taiwan movement that
Yes.
was opposed to the nationalist parties wanting more economic integration with China.
That's right.
But that surprised me, that the Nationalist Party was the party of Chiang Kai-shek, which was anti-China. So
No, they weren't anti-China, they were anti-communists.
Oh.
They were pro our homies. They wanted their homies in charge. Okay, is homie a good enough term to use? Okay.
Would you comment on, I'm Judy Parr, would you comment on the situation in Hong Kong when it was transferred to, back to China? What effect did that have on the Taiwanese? or
I attended a
Taiwan?
rally in July of 1997, 100,000 people out in a big open square in Taipei for Say No to China, Say Yes to Taiwan. And it was wonderful. It was just extremely good to be among, I was a pastor of a little church then, and it was really good to be with people who, I was just down there. I wasn't on a stage or anything. I was just down there among the Taiwanese, and I was one of them. You know, that was one of those moments when I began to feel that maybe this was home. Yeah. And then Taiwan watched Hong Kong. And then when Hong Kong went down a few years ago, things are, if it happens to us, it won't be one country, two systems, because we can't trust them. We can't trust them. Look what they did to Hong Kong. Yeah. And Hong Kongers, the terrible thing happened, the most terrible, terrible thing that could ever happen. Was it about losing freedom? No, it was about losing money. They lost money. We can't let that happen. So, okay.
So,
Yeah.
David, Larry Schuyler, so you're going back to Taiwan soon
Tomorrow.
because you want to vote.
Yep.
Explain,
Sharon and I became
explain
citizens
what you're doing.
a
What's
month
the
before
vote?
we left there.
Why is that important to you? What are you voting for? And put the situation in a context for me, please.
It's not for the president, it's not for the parliament. That'll happen in 2024. This is for city mayors, county mayors, city councils, neighborhood chiefs. It's 9 levels of election they're holding on the same day. Maybe in some places we won't have certain of those. And there are 3 propositions on the ballot, one of which is to lower the voting age to 18, because the voting age is now 20. And the Nationalist Party, out of one side of its mouth, is saying, yes, yes, we would like the youth. But out of the other side of its mouth, it's saying, when you go into the place and they hand you your ballots, this is for this proposition, don't even take the one for the changing the voting age, because a certain threshold of people must vote in that election for the amount of votes to make it. And if you don't take the ballot, then that keeps that threshold down. That'll keep that out of the way. So out of one side of their mouth, the Nationalists are saying, yes, let's get the youth vote. But out of the other side, they're saying the youth vote's going to really condemn us to the dustbin of history. Don't even take the ballot. And so that's one of the 3 propositions we'll be voting on.
May I ask which side you're voting for?
I bleed green, which is the pro-Taiwan party. I bleed green, even my blood.
Did I understand you correctly that a number of the Taiwanese churches in the States are becoming Mandarin churches. I'm wondering what do you see that has brought that about?
Numbers, because clergy like to have lots of bums in seats. And people coming from Taiwan, it's just not happening anymore. Taiwan is prosperous and more free than here, and the people's vote elects the president. There's none of this electoral college nonsense, Taiwan is a good place to be. But people from China still say America's better than China, and so they will come. The church sees we speak Mandarin, they speak Mandarin, they would respond to our kind of loving Christian concern for them, and if we just don't talk politics, they will dare to come into our doors and fill our pastors' pews. And so there's a great big RCA congregation was started by Taiwanese people on Staten Island in New York. Big, successful, marvelous church. Their pastor was even the president of the General Synod back around 2003. That church is now a Mandarin church. They're non-political, and they operate in Mandarin and English because that's where the people are whom they wish to serve. And I don't blame them. They are doing a marvelous job of ministry to people who need it, and in the context of that ministry, they are preaching the gospel. I regret that it's not Taiwanese anymore, but the guy who gave me my Chinese name, he was the pastor there as the church got built. Yeah.
Bob Churro, so what role in all of this do the entrepreneurs of Taiwan play? Because they have taken advantage of the cross-channel investment opportunities. They have a lot of capital invested in China, and they're making a good profit off of that. And I'm curious where they fall in all of this in terms of the mainland's claim on the island.
In terms of the claim, what they want is let's just keep calm and keep making money. And I imagine that I will see a lot of them in Taiwan on Saturday also having come home to vote. But they and I will be voting for different parties. That's all. The entrepreneurs are about let's make money, and there's money to be made over there. Judy is passing this. No.
Yeah, follow-up.
Bob has a follow-up.
Is the entrepreneurial class largely drawn from the Chiang Kai-shek crowd?
The entrepreneurial class are Taiwanese, because back in the days when the glass ceiling was there, if you were going to be in the government, in the military, a professor in a university, you came from above the glass ceiling, and the people below, darn it, they were just stuck. All they were allowed to do was make money, and they did.
I think you mentioned there were 3 prepositions. What are the
Yeah.
other 2?
I don't know. I plan on Thursday morning to go to the office of the church where I'm a member. I don't think I'm a member there anymore. But I'm going to go to the church office, and they're going to say, oh, Aboksu, that's who they know me as. Welcome back. I say, hey, I've come back to vote. Great. Who should I vote for? And they'll tell me. They'll tell me. Because I haven't, I only follow the news from Taiwan in English, and in English will not tell me about the local people running other than for the mayor in the city where I'm going to be voting. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we're back to Dr. Myers again. I'm sure you have several questions, Dave.
All ready for you.
Dave, so explain to me the difference between simple and complex Chinese. I have a book that's being translated for foreign rights in China, but in complex Chinese for
Really?
sale in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Okay. When China declared itself independent from Taiwan back in 1949, okay, they had this tremendous population of illiterate people, hundreds of millions of illiterate people, because Chinese character is difficult to learn, And it's often taught by people with a classical interest in, well, you can't just write that with a ballpoint pen. You must use a brush and do calligraphy to do it right. That's who got the jobs teaching reading and writing. And so a lot of people were illiterate. And one of the things that the Ministry of Education under the Communist Party there did that was right was they said, we've got to get these characters down to fewer strokes in a character. And so they reduced the numbers of strokes in a character. It lost the beauty. It's like Shakespearean language is so much better than West Michigan, isn't it? West Michigan here, we don't speak with the beauty of Shakespeare. So the written language lost its beauty, but through their push of education and teaching simplified characters, they created literacy in that nation where there had been a great deal of illiteracy. So the characters are simplified. I look at them and I kind of scratch my head and this one is probably this and this one is probably that. The other thing it did, though, is it cut off the newly literate people from anything that had been written before. Because they said, now the only thing that you have to read is the stuff that we print for you to read. And so the historical literature was lost to anybody who wasn't a scholar.
Yeah.
Sound like Old English.
Well, done in Gothic script, Can you read German? Not at all. Well, if you can read German, can you read German in Gothic script? Sorta. Yeah, that's what happened to Chinese after 1949. Yes?
And the next iteration of that was the computer revolution and the keyboard. And they had to modify the language. They had to figure out how to fit the language onto the keyboard for purposes of journalism and other things. So it modified it yet again.
Right, but my daughter does that. She just sits at a Chinese keyboard and types Chinese. And it's got the same keys and same layout, but the keys do different things. And with the miracle of computing, you can take a text, download it in one set of characters, and hit a couple of buttons, and it changes it over to the other set. So there's but that had to wait for computerization to happen, and you can do it. I think we have 2 minutes. Are there announcements that have to be made? And we'll put Jane in charge here, and I'll step aside. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, David. I was going to say, this is a little bit off, but I once attended, as part of my job with the RCA, I had to attend the various council meetings from time to time. And so I went to the Asian Council, and most quarreling I have ever seen amongst councils. I was really taken aback between the animosity and the difference between the Taiwanese who were there and the Koreans who were there. They didn't like each other very much at that council meeting. And it was kind of explained to me that as you're talking about the Taiwanese Presbyterians, they were like, they come out of the Presbyterian, they have that theology. The Koreans do not. They have a whole other theology. And they were constantly battling. I mean, they really battled at that council meeting. And I was like, whoa, this was a new experience. Okay. So yeah, very educational. Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, I'm not sure if she's still looking, but I know Pastor Jill is looking for someone to drive Carrie Russell, her mom, to the worship service sponsored by CUSP tonight at Third Reformed. So if any of you were already planning on going to that service tonight at Third, you might want to check with Pastor Jill today for those arrangements. I know there are also, some of you have probably seen the link online through the Hope Church emails that they're also looking for drivers to bring Carrie to church every Sunday. So if you've seen that, or if you're available, if that's a possibility, you might want to check that out too. Next week, is Advent. Happy New Year. So we will start with Lynn Jappinga, who is going to start our series off about the female ancestors of Jesus. So join us next week for the first session. In our sessions, we'll have 3 sessions on this during Advent, because we also have, as you saw probably as you came in, there's also the sign up for the St. Nicholas breakfast, which will be happening in the first Sunday of December as well. So thank you. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next week, when maybe there won't be as much snow.